Newcastle's transfer strategy has shifted. What does it say about PIF and where does it leave the club? To wander past St. James Park on the morning of October 8, 2021, glimpsing workers and fans cleaning up the debris of 12 hours earlier, was to observe the aftermath of an awakening. It was the morning after the night before, the first day of the rest of Newcastle United's life. Newcastle's home had been the scene of raucous celebration that Thursday evening, a reaction to the news the penny-pinching Mike Ashley era was over, and more notably, that he had been replaced by the richest sovereign wealth fund on earth. Advertisement, the public investment fund, PIF, of Saudi Arabia was in, and 1,256 days after that takeover went through, Newcastle had their first trophy in 70 years.
So why is everyone suddenly talking about GLP-1?
It's the hormone that helps control cravings, blood sugar, and appetite. Basically, it tells your brain you're full.
Most GLP-1 supplements out there are actually cinnamon or turmeric in a capsule,
Which don't actually support GLP-1.
Edavita GLP-1 is different. It's the first capsule with Akkermansia, a gut bacteria linked to GLP-1 release.
Plus berberine, green tea, grapeseed, hibiscus, and prebiotics to feed the good bacteria.
Scan the QR code now or visit grabdeal.us/7 to explore the details.
Under PIF, the club has returned to the Champions League twice. A side mired in a relegation battle when PIF arrived have spent the past half-decade nudging at the door to the elite, finishing ahead of Liverpool, Chelsea, Manchester United twice, and Tottenham Hotspur 3 times. Back in those early days, there was talk of Newcastle winning the Premier League in the next 5 to 10 years, principally from the mouth of Amanda Staveley, a 10% minority partner of PIF who sold her stake and left Tyneside in July 2024. Yet it is another departure that has provided the clearest sign yet that the Newcastle United of the near future is not the one many hoped for 5 years ago. The shock resignation of Eddie Howe, revealed by The Athletic on Thursday, underlines the reality. Newcastle's strategy has shifted. Even as PIF remain in situ, the goal of quickly becoming a sustained, dominant force in the Premier League is fading with each day of this transfer window. The summer of 2025 was consumed by Newcastle, unsuccessfully, staving off interest in Alexander Isak. A year on, they have been swamped by high-profile departures. Howe's quitting came on the back of Anthony Gordon and Sandro Tonali being sold. Club talisman Bruno Guimaraes has informed executives he would like to join Arsenal. Manchester United have their eye on Lewis Hall. Between the takeover and the end of June 2024, when a frantic few days saw them rush to sell Elliot Anderson and Yankuba Minte to avoid breaching profit and sustainability rules, PSR. Newcastle spent more than $450,606.7 million on new players with little coming the other way. Their largest departures in that time were Alan Saint-Maximin, who left for PIF-owned Al Ahly for £19.5 million, and Chris Wood, whose move to Nottingham Forest generated £10 less than Newcastle had paid for him just 18 months earlier. Advertisement, even with those sales of Anderson and Minte, Newcastle's net spent across 2021-22 to 2023-24 was £408 the 5th highest in England and ahead of Liverpool and Manchester City. On a gross basis, they were the 6th highest spenders on players. The wage bill jumped from 12th highest in the division to 8th. A fallow year followed before spending ramped up again last season, in what now looks like the final salvo of the post-takeover era. Even with the British record sale of Isak, Newcastle spent £141 net on transfers in the summer of 2025, or an estimated £280 gross, comfortably a club record. Signing Ewan Jaehoon in mid-June 2026 pushed the 2025-26 accounting period figure to around £300, though the sale of Gordon to Barcelona for £69 reduced the net spend. Once agent fees and other costs are factored in, July's spending exceeded the £92.05 received from Spurs for Tonali, but not by much. More pertinently, Newcastle's largesse has tapered even as Premier League clubs are spending ever more. Since June 2024, using Transfermarkt figures, 10 English clubs have spent more, net, on transfers. If selling stars has taken the headlines, this summer has also seen an abrupt change in Newcastle's buying plans. In the first 5 seasons under PIF, Newcastle spent around £75 on players aged 20 or younger, and the bulk of that went on 2 highly rated English fullbacks, Tino Livramento and Hall. This summer, they've already spent more than £100 on players in that age bracket. Sean Stour is 18, while Bazomana Tour, Alaji Bamba and Jay Ewan are 20. The origin of signings has altered, too. Other than Minte, who came from Odense in 2023 but was immediately shipped out on loan, the previous youngest signing from abroad was a 22-year-old Sven Botman. Advertisement among English clubs, only Chelsea, £168 in 2025-26, and Brighton and Hove Albion, £128 in 2024-25, have ever spent more on under-21s in a single season than Newcastle have in the current transfer window. 11 months ago, Newcastle had just parted with over £50 for the 28-year-old Jon Wissa. Now they're stacking the squad with youth, even as their most senior players are heading for the exit. It is a surprising development that gives ballast to the theory Howe felt he was ill-equipped to tackle a season he was already starting under pressure following last year's underwhelming showing and wasteful summer. The volte-face in transfer strategy is not necessarily negative. Several Premier League clubs, including local rivals Sunderland, have shown the merits of buying youngsters from abroad and developing them. Brighton, Brentford, and Bournemouth offer successful case studies. There is much to be said for buying low and selling high, particularly in an age of financial regulation. The hiring of Matthias Jasel as Howe's replacement tracks too. The Red Bull Salzburg side he successfully managed before moving to Saudi Arabia was one of the youngest in Europe. But the problem on Tyneside is none of those clubs listed are aiming to be what Newcastle fans were promised earlier this decade or even 9 months ago, when CEO David Hopkinson said that he saw this club being in the debate about being the top club in the world by 2030. Buying low and selling high is fine for some, but it's not what was offered in 2021, and it's not, you suspect, what PIF intended. Last year's Carabao Cup win was meant to be the start of something, not the high water mark. For some, the culprit is obvious: football's financial rules. PIF's abundant wealth was welcomed by most fans, even as it was known football was no longer the lawless land that welcomed Roman Abramovich to Chelsea in 2003 and Sheikh Mansour to Manchester City 5 years later. Advertisement optimism that Newcastle could spend was hardly unfounded. PIF inherited a club from Ashley where revenues had stalled and would take time to build. The solution was to pour money in at speed, almost all of it going on transfers. Based on publicly known amounts, only Chelsea and Everton have received more than Newcastle's £492 in net owner funding since October 2021. That has fueled the club's improvement in recent seasons. Yet that funding might have been more were it not for football's rules and Newcastle's owners' unwillingness to exploit them. Until the June 2025 sale of St James Park to a fellow group company, Newcastle did not employ any of the regulatory circumnavigation seen elsewhere. That is commendable, but has also put them at a competitive disadvantage, not least when they were racking up losses in an attempt to break the glass ceiling. Remove the paper profit from that St James Park sale, and Newcastle lost £254 in 4 seasons. PSR has received much criticism from Newcastle fans, but squad cost ratio, SCR, which tethers club spending limits to revenues, is even worse for competitive balance. The frequency with which the Premier League's richest are now pilfering the best players from fellow English clubs is no coincidence. Inherently, it allows the biggest earners to spend more. Newcastle have narrowed the salary gap, most notably with respect to Spurs and Manchester United, but 4 clubs still spent over £100 more than them on wages in 2024-25. Clubs trying to locate a seat at the top table find themselves more susceptible to revenue drops when Champions League football is missed, stuck between domestic and continental rules regimes. Player sales, one way to bridge the revenue gap, are averaged over 3 years and less immediately effective than under PSR. Newcastle's revenues are growing steadily, but so are the incomes of the Premier League's Big Six. Advertisement, moreover, Newcastle are now in a settlement agreement with UEFA that aims to reduce those losses. Breaching it confers a European ban. It is a further restraint, and while the near £300 million in player sales of the past year will help a long way toward compliance, their margin for error, for example, misfiring on big signings a year ago, is much lower than those very clubs they hope to dislodge. Not all of the blame can be pointed at football's strictures. For one, PIF knew those rules when it arrived. Newcastle spent heavily in the early days and quickly used up the headroom they were left by Ashley. Signing Matt Targett for £15 was wasteful, as was the hit taken on Wood. Splurging £38 on Harvey Barnes a year after spending more on fellow left-winger Gordon was a curious choice. Wages soared to 95% of revenue immediately following the takeover. Signing Wissa for double their original bid smacked of panic. 2 consecutive summers of very public misses on key targets does not befit a serious operation. Revenue has jumped impressively, but even more ambitious moves that might turbocharge it, and the club's appeal, have been lacking. 5 years on, progress regarding redeveloping St. James Park remains glacial, even as Newcastle purchased a slew of Grade I-listed houses abutting their home ground in May. A site for a new state-of-the-art training ground has been selected, but construction is yet to begin. Infrastructure investments sit outside football's financial regulations, so the lack of movement on the stadium cannot be attributed to rules-based fears and actually serve as a restraint in an era where club spending limits are dictated by income. Indeed, Aston Villa, who have frequently danced with the regulatory devil, have shuttered their North Stand for redevelopment and expansion this season, taking a hit to income now in exchange for bigger returns in the future. Little at Newcastle screams long-term, and, allied with the redrawing of transfer blueprints, it is reasonable to wonder what exactly PIF and minority partner Jamie Rubin intend for the club. Advertisement, when it became clear in April that PIF would cut funding for LIV Golf, and there were fears about Saudi sports investments generally, no comment was offered either way on Newcastle, though sources familiar with their thinking suggested it was business as usual. Newcastle have been heavily reliant on their majority shareholder, with injections of equity cash arriving, on average, every 5 months during the first 4 years under PIF. Last season, £156 and 5 pence M was provided, £5 M of it to the women's team. There has been no owner funding since the decision was made to pull back from LIV, albeit those big player sales have reduced the club's cash need in the short term. But it is easy to speculate that a move to a youth-focused transfer model, rather than plug-in-and-play stars, could be linked to PIF's broader retreat from overseas spending. Most importantly for Newcastle, this fresh approach must work. Putting aside PIF's earlier promises, there is plenty of logic in Newcastle's recent transfer activity. Signings from afar come with risk, but they backed Premier League experience last season, bringing in Anthony Elanga and Wissa at great expense, and saw little return. Spending has hardly stopped, and an imminent deal for 24-year-old goalkeeper Lucas Hornacek will bump it up further. Newcastle are mirroring other clubs in targeting foreign youngsters, but doing so with a thicker wallet. Finishing 12th with 17 league defeats last season was a gross underachievement. Fans will expect a better showing, even with an inexperienced squad. But that improvement looks limited in scope now, and the aim of being the top club in the world by 2030 looks to be a complete fantasy. Newcastle have shifted strategy, and while there are plenty of reasons for that, there is little evidence the dreams of those 2021 revelers will be realized anytime soon.